Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3.
Perfect. Okay, members, good evening. It's by my clock here, the clock there, and the clock over there, and the clock on my phone. It said it's 7 o'clock. So welcome to this evening's Extraordinary Scrutiny Committee meeting this evening, Thursday, the 21st of October. A couple of things before we actually start. Please, can members and officers with an electric device mute it, please, to avoid any feedback. And members, please speak clearly and closely into your mic without trying to eat it, and then switch back to mute once you have finished speaking. Otherwise, that will throw the experience for members and members of the public dialing in remotely. They basically won't be able to hear us. Any remote participants that wish to speak must join the meeting via the participants list sent out to them. Please do not the link that was on the website, which is for public to view the meeting only. Also, any members that wish to address and access the meeting using, or should do so using their SBC laptop to participate, you may have problems in terms of speaking remotely if you are not using either of those devices. Well, no, there are hiccups at times with iPads and mobile phones. So please, if you are online and wishing to speak, do so using a laptop or the Orwell Borough Council device. Can you also keep your cameras and microphones off unless you wish to speak? The meeting will be recorded, and data collected during the recording of the meeting will be retained in accordance with the Council's data retention policy, and the recording of the meeting may be added to the Council's website. That's the official bit done. So welcome again, everybody, to the meeting. Members, committee members, visiting members, and any members of the public who are listening in. My name is Councillor Lloyd Bone. I'm the chairman of the Scrutiny Committee and chairing this meeting this evening. For the benefit of the members of the public and those listening virtually, we have in attendance also the Chief Executive of Swell Borough Council, Mid-Kent Services Director Steve McGuinness, Head of Policy, Governance and Customer Services and Democratic Services. I understand also Head of Planning, Mr. James Freeman, is also in attendance. Any other members of staff either dialed in or present, please? Oh, sorry, Rich Clark, who's the Head of Audit Partnership. Thank you. Before we move into the main item, again, I know it's already been mentioned, but welcome to Councillor Mike Henderson on his return to the Chamber. Particularly welcome back to the Scrutiny Committee. It's good to have you in, and I look forward to your participation this evening. It's missed you. Agenda item 1, emergency evacuation procedure. People are aware of the emergency evacuation procedures. Should there be a ringing in your ears that's not recognised, please leave the building in the most appropriate way. Okay. Agenda item 2, apologies for absence. Am I reading this all? I can do it. Okay. We have apologies this evening from Councillor Eakin, who's been substituted by Councillor Mike Whiting, Councillor Perkin being substituted by Councillor Henderson, and Councillor Woodford. There's no substitutes. Any other apologies for absence? No. Agenda item 3, declarations of interest. Any members to any interest to declare pecuniary or non-pecuniary, please do so now. Nope. Thank you. Agenda item 4, and the main item for business this evening is the planning support, erroneous planning decisions that occurred in recent weeks. We have also in attendance the leader of the Council, Councillor Truelove, and what's that? Councillor Baldock, is he dialing? Okay, Councillor Baldock is we're trying to reach Baldock to dial in at this moment. He may have just joined the meeting. Thank you. In terms of the actual report itself, first of all, I want to thank those who've been involved in writing the report and particularly the investigation. I think it's a good report. In general, it's well structured and well written. So my thanks, first of all.
Can I speak on this?
In a moment, Councillor Baldock, thank you.
Oh, I can speak. Okay.
Oh, right. I thought you meant, can you speak on this item? And also my thanks to the support, and I'll say it again, use it at the end, to Democratic Services. Joe is dialing in virtually and Billy is navigating all the technical stuff this evening. In terms of the conversation, when we get to it, I will ask Councillor Truelove to introduce the reports in a moment. I'm going to break it down into two sections to begin with. The first will be any questions and discussion on the actual investigation from the Mid-Kent, the ICT side. Here, and then we will have a short break. And then the second part will be the response that we as Swale Borough Council issued regarding this. So there are two distinct sort of issues here, which I think will be served best by almost keeping them as much as we can separate. In terms of the first part, I'm going to take the reports, the investigation reports, section by section, so people can ask questions. And in terms of the questions, I will go to committee members first, and then any members who are online virtually, if they wish to speak, if they can indicate in the chat, I will eventually get to you, but it may not be in the order that you see in the chat, because obviously you can't see who's indicating within the council chamber to speak, but I will eventually get to you, rest assured on that. Is that okay with everybody? Thank you very much. Okay, on that note, in which case I will hand over to Councillor Truelove to introduce the report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman and members. This is such a complicated thing. I'm not sure that I can do an introduction that amounts to a synopsis of two very complicated things. One of which my understanding of all that stuff about ICT is a bit beyond me anyway. This is essentially about operational things, and you've had the two reports. So you had the report that came to the previous scrutiny meeting, and now you've got the audit report. There's no update, so Chairman, once you want to start questions, we will do our best to respond to them.
Thank you, Councillor Truelove. Larissa or any of the officers, anything to add at this particular point? Thank you. Okay, members, so we'll go through the reports. Before I actually get into the investigation reports, any comments, general comments in terms of, I think of my pages, the first couple of pages of the agenda, so pages, I think it's 5 and 6 before the actual the actual report itself, those bits. Councillor Dender.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, just a quick question. I'll probably come back to it later, but it picks up on 2.3, authenticity. I'm just wondering, I noticed on the applications that James Freeman's signature was on the end of each application. And my question is, are those digital signatures, and if so, who is applying them and at what stage? Thanks.
So they are digital signatures that are applied. My understanding is automatically they're within the system. So as the system pulls all the information in, it also adds the digital signature.
Could I come back quickly? Thanks. Yes, really, that's more or less the answer I expected. But surely they had. Sorry, let me ask another question. If those signatures, if James Freeman's signature, the head of planning, had not been on those applications, would they have been accepted as valid?
I think probably not, but I don't know that for certain. That would be something we would need to get some legal advice on. But my feeling is that they probably wouldn't have been a complete document. So, but we would need to seek further legal advice on that.
OK, I'll come back on that if I may later, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Following on from Councillor Dender, something I was going to ask about the signature. Does the fact the signatures attached to every planning decision infer that James has actually seen every document and verified it, or is it just assumed, as he's head of planning, that is the inference that is held? Hey, thank you.
Just say I don't see every document because we get 2,000 odd applications a year, including subs and everything. It'd be impossible to do. So there is delegation, and through the system, there's normally when you put through a planning application, there's checks and balances all the way through. So all the senior officers get to check off the decision notices, the reports, and everything else that goes with it, until it gets to Mid-Kent services themselves, and everything's published. So there's all those checks and balances in the system.
Sorry, Chair, if I could come back again, my apologies. I was going to reserve that for later, but as Councillor Davies brought it up, that was my point really, and Mr. Freeman has referred to checks and balances. If these signatures had not been on these applications, then we would not possibly have had any legal action in the courts or any costs in the court. So my question is very simple. Why are they put on absolutely automatically? That surely, and in this particular case, who didn't pick up these comments before they put that digital signature on the end of the application?
So, as James said, we have a large number of planning applications. We also, Mid-Kent Planning Services also do planning applications for Maidstone. It is in the system, so nobody adds it. If someone were to add it, actually human error is worse than computer error. And if you think for the last 9 years, we've had no issues. There is a question about, well, why do we do it when it's in the test system? Because if we didn't do it in the test system, then when the problems happened in the test system, but the problem with that is you're then not testing reality, because what then could happen is you do the test, it seems to work, you put it out and something goes wrong. So I think looking at the report, it's clear that what the issue actually occurred back in 2018 and it happened. We have, although the checks and balances do take place, and that's 100% checks on all live, which is why it's never happened before, 100% checks, it would be the risk of human error would be much higher if it was to check. And if we were to have James check everyone, then I'm not saying the risk would be higher with James, but what it would be is that would be hugely slowing up the process. And the other issue is, although there are checks and balances, James still has responsibility, and that's why James's signature goes on there, because at the end of the day, it is James who is responsible. So he has to make sure that those checks and balances are in place. And with every live application, we've never had a problem.
Through you, Chair. I totally understand, and of course I totally understand Mr. Freeman can't check every one. I still come back to these checks and balances, and I wonder if there's a legal question here. Because what you're saying, I think, is because the signature is automatically on these applications, it's automatically assumed by whoever's putting that digital stamp on that they're approved. That is, quite frankly, nonsense.
No, because what happens in the system is when you get to the print bit, the system pulls all the things together and makes it live. It's not that whatever happens, bearing in mind also this was a test, so none of those checks and balances took place because we were testing the system. So that's the key, but it's not that we just say write what you like and it's got a signature on it. It's not that at all. Please, I would ask members to remember the difference between the processes we use for the live system and the processes we use for the test system, where the checks and balances didn't happen in the test system because nobody was ever expecting anything to happen.
So I've had a couple of messages from some members who were trying to dial in. They've not been able to get in on the Teams. Councillor Horton, I understand, is on the phone, and Councillor Burt is on as a visitor. But they're in attendance, but they've not been able to actually get on. But we shall plough on anyway. Okay, Councillor Henderson.
Thank you. Can I suggest the questions so far are not the right questions, because the questions so far relate to the error. Now we know why the error happened, and you know, perhaps all sorts of things, but errors do happen, and that's fine. My concern is that the real error happened 3 years ago, because Mid-Kent Planning Services didn't specify, and there are comments all the way through this report about how specifications were informal, verbal, not complete, and so on. Mid-Kent Planning Services didn't specify to Mid-Kent IT precisely what they wanted, and Mid-Kent IT didn't ask them, apparently, to specify exactly what they wanted. Because if that had been done, the problem would never have arisen. And I don't think we should be targeting or even worrying over much about the problem that happened in August 21. I think we should be worrying about a much more fundamental error that was made 3 years ago. And I simply raised that as a point. Thank you.
Thank you, Anton. That's certainly a point which we'll get to in the report. I know it's I think you'll hit one of the nails on the head there, Councillor Henderson. This isn't a 2021 issue. This is an issue that could have happened any time from 2018 potentially onwards. Councillor Whiting.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just want to completely support what Councillor Henderson has just said. This is a systemic issue, and my concern is that those who have oversight over this, which are the shareholders of the partnership, effectively the leaders of the council, have not perhaps had what they needed to ensure that this kind of thing didn't happen, because they would have put in place processes to ensure that the IT were talking to planning and planning were talking to IT, such that these problems didn't occur, which is exactly the point that Councillor Henderson was making. So there is an oversight issue here from the effective shareholders of the company, and it's not down to officers. I mean, I cannot understand, of my previous experience of IT, which is quite extensive, I do not understand quite why Mr. Freeman's signature was allowed to appear on a test site. You know, you could have just put Mickey Mouse on and this wouldn't have happened. This would have gone away. But somebody somewhere decided that actually they should use Mr. Freeman's signature on this test site. It was bizarre to me, but that's something for others to look at. But there is an oversight issue here, I think, Chairman, that Councillor Henderson quite rightly raises. Thank you.
Well, I can see that there's some ultimate responsibility, and I can see that Councillor Whiting wishes to sort of say that the leader of this council in 2018, which was Councillor Bowles, and me since then, and the various leaders of Maidstone Council should have been able to foresee an error and a lack of risk management in an IT system. I just say to all of you, in all reason, would you actually think that the leaders of councils would actually be in a position to do that? We have people working for us, and we naturally expect that they will ensure that the operational business of the council is maintained. This issue has never come to any of the leaders, several leaders, to actually consider. So I really can't see that there's any credence in saying the leaders should have known about this, because I just think that is nonsense.
Mr. Chairman, if I can just come back very quickly on that, because I think that is a nonsense answer, with due respect to Councillor Truelove. If you are the leader of an organisation, you are expected to know what's going on. You get paid the big bucks to do that. And if there's matters of detail that you decide not to engage with, then I think that's a failing of the member who has a responsibility to oversee this. And it's not a failing of the officers, it's not a failing of the staff, it's a failing of the member oversight. And there's clearly been a failing of member oversight, whether it was Councillor Bowles or whether it was Councillor Truelove or the half a dozen various leaders of Maidstone or other councils. There's clearly been a lack of oversight. And really, if the leader cannot does not have the time, and I can quite understand why that may be, then appointing a member to have that oversight on his behalf would be better than simply not having the oversight at all. Thank you.
Yes, we can't have a whole evening of Councillor Whiting saying that what I said is nonsense and me saying what he said is nonsense, just to say that the leaders are on a strategic board. These are operational matters. When the strategic board meets, it meets to discuss strategic issues, these issues. And I get what your motive is, Councillor Whiting, and it's totally predictable. I'll pass on your best wishes to Councillor Bowles, because this actually happened initially in 2018. I'm sure he'd be delighted to know that you think he should have anticipated it at that time.
Chairman, just on a personal point of information, I have no motive here other than to find out the truth of the matter. No, I don't. I have no motive here, and I don't want to undermine Councillor Truelove, but we have to understand where the responsibility lies for these decisions. And a lot of the oversight lies with elected members. That's all I'm saying. And it could be any elected member in the whole course of things. So I'm not trying to have a spat with Councillor Truelove. I'm simply asking the committee to consider who eventually has a responsibility. It's not Mr. Freeman. You know, I'm sure he didn't agree to have his signature attested to a site, but somebody has to take responsibility for what went wrong. And I think it's unfair to put that responsibility onto officers. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to move into we'll get to the report in a minute. I've got Councillor Dender, Councillor Gibson, then Councillor Henderson, and then we'll get into the actual report.
We're still on 5 and 6, yes?
Yes, yes.
Thank you. So I'll keep within your brief. Yes, from the comments by Councillor Davey, Councillor Henderson, Councillor Mighting, and the comments from the Chief Exec, I want to refer to 2.7 on page 6. And this is critical. There have been at least 4 periods of testing since 2018, and each one had the risk of erroneous decisions being printed. However, the issue only occurs when the print function is used. And we'll come to the report, but I will repeat what Councillor Henderson said. It's littered all through the report that the risks have not been properly managed. The risks have not been properly seen, and they've not been properly managed. I think, as most people here know, I'm an IT professional of over 50 years. I've done these kinds of projects many times over the years in multi-million-pound projects. And this absurdity of a piece of code in 2018 that was missed by one IT professional or whatever, and that not being picked up in processes that should have been put in place all these years, okay? That is a total lack of responsibility by members as well as everybody else. I'm sorry, but it is. If in 4 years, this has not been picked up, and yet here this report says we know it could have happened in the last 4 years. I think the case is made. The responsibility and knowing that those processes are weak, that the testing is, quite frankly, hopeless. The IT department, or the planning department, but I think it's the IT department in this case, should have known that that particular, what we call in IT case, a scenario, that if you print the application, it may do something different, has to be tested. It's a part of the testing protocol of any good system. Also, in the report, which we'll come to, I'm sorry I'm skipping a bit, but I have to refer to it here, it refers that the IT department has very little knowledge of the system it's using. Yet it doesn't say anything about training, uniform, that they've been properly trained on the use of that system. And there's obviously a massive weakness there. Now, those, with all due respect to Councillor Truelove, and it's not a personal thing here, yes, Councillor Bowles may be in here as well. Yes, members may be in here. But to allow a system to be continually used by this council without proper testing, without proper supervision, and without proper protocols is our members' responsibility.
Councillor Gibson.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to go back to Councillor Truelove during his previous comments, one of which was, would you, and he's talking about everybody here, and probably wider members, and maybe the man on the Clapham omnibus, would you expect the leader to have such a tight grip on that particular aspect? My answer to that is absolutely not. It's an absolute nonsense to expect that of any leader. Again, strategically, I would expect him to have an awareness, but at the operational level, I'd be very, very disappointed because it's micromanagement, and that's not what I want a leader to do. Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify here. Councillor Whiting was kind enough to say he agreed with the point I was raising. Let me say I don't agree with the points he's raising. I did not at any point seek to blame anybody. Leaders, I'd love to blame Councillor Bowles, but even that wouldn't be fair. And certainly not Councillor Truelove. The point I was making was that was the key problem, and that's the problem we must look to solve. And I don't want anybody fired or disciplined or jumped up and down on or whatever over this. I simply want us to say, where did the problem arise? How do we avoid it ever happening again? Not just on planning, but on any other IT system. And that's where I come from. Thank you.
100% agree with you on that, Councillor Henderson. That's it. It's not a, it's what the lessons are learnt going forward. But Councillor Truelove.
Yes, very briefly, I do think that's a fair point. We're not looking to blame anybody. What we're looking to do is discover what actually went wrong. In the end, it is a member's responsibility. It was members who actually made the decision to use Mid-Kent services for all these services, and that perhaps was a key decision made in the past.
Okay, members, we'll move into the reports. So I'm going to take this section by section rather than page by page. Any questions on the first part of the report of the incident itself? I will, if I may, kick off on this one and just trying to understand, and this refers also in part to the appendix about the chronology or the timeline of the events. Point one. So the issue itself occurred on the 19th of August, where the council's published 6 errors. By my reading of this, it wasn't until then the 31st of August, this jumping across different parts of the actual report, but it's then reported on the 31st of August to the head of audit partnership. So that's 11 days difference. So the first question is, why was there an 11-day delay? And I appreciate that the 31st, or there was a bank holiday there, but that's 1 day. But then further on from that, why was there then a gap from the 31st of August to the, I think it was the press release on the 7th of September, again, before this thing came out. Now that, I know it's a different sort of kettle of fish, but if it was a GDPR breach, then you would be absolutely like hauled over the coals for that sort of time delay. So why was there that length of time missing?
Steve.
Yeah. Thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Chairman. In relation to the first question, the delay to the 31st of August.
That's it. Thank you.
Yeah. Is that on now? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. In relation to the delay of the 31st of August, just to kind of make clear that the immediate concern was to make sure that we had an understanding and were able to respond to the incident. Something that we had a small working group of officers dealing with kind of immediately. The second step was to instigate an independent investigation to make sure that we learn lessons through the incident and were able to take those forward to safeguard the process going forward. That's your question.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, yeah, fine. I'd just like to ask a question. I'm sure there's a reasonable explanation. It does say on the timeline that the first time this was reported was by a member of the public, not by anybody in the authority, on the 19th of August. So I'd just like to have a better understanding of what happened between the 19th of August and the 30th of August.
Thank you, Chairman. So after the incident was reported, it was investigated by the Mid-Kent Planning Support Manager with support from the IT service. We immediately after that drew in advice from the legal services team, liaised with colleagues in the planning service and communications team. And that was a continuous process through to the 31st of August. That's been an ongoing process.
Councillor Whiting.
Yes, thank you. Just picking up on that point. I mean, a number of 6-day delays through this timeline, where it seems to be getting taken far too long to get responses back and for action to be decided upon by those responsible for doing that. We have that one from the 30th through the 1st of September to the 7th of September. And there are others where we had these sort of 6 days delay from August, 25th of August to 31st of August. And I just wonder, this had happened before. So we know what the legal position was. The legal position was we either get the applicants to put in the new application, or we go to the High Court, take ourselves to the High Court and get it sorted. And I really don't understand why there was such a delay and consequent expense in getting more legal advice about something that we and the LGA and the local government family actually understand, because it's happened elsewhere. And it just seems to me that there was too many long delays in that timeline in getting this thing sorted. And I can see the Chief Exec would like to come back. Thank you, Chairman.
So you used the word, and people have used the word delay. We could have put a day by day, hour by hour, and then we spoke to this person. There was no time in this actually including the bank holiday when there weren't discussions happening. It's really interesting that when this became public, there was an article in a national newspaper saying, why are they going to judicial review? They don't need to go to judicial review. There's another way of dealing with it. So actually the idea that this was, we've been here before, I think if it had just been a standard mistaken planning application, the difficulty was this wasn't a planning application decision that was determined for first, it was an error. And so that isn't something that happens all the time. And the reason we had to get that legal advice was because we weren't sure, because to the man, as Councillor Gibson says, the man on the Clapham omnibus, to say, do you think this is a legal planning application because it says incy wincy spider climbed up the water spout, they'd say, well, no. I mean, because that's why this became newsworthy all over the country, because you never get a planning application that says, what am I doing here? Am I the chosen one? You don't get that. And so it wasn't just a case of a mistaken planning that we said yes and we meant to say no, or we got things in the wrong order. It was so erroneous that it wasn't certain. And so we had to get that planning advice. And even today, there is things online from clever ex-planning managers, barristers that still say, you didn't need to do that. You could have just withdrawn it. Equally, there is case law that says, yeah, you need to do this, because even though it's erroneous. So I think the issue we had is, this is real people with their real planning decisions. We needed to make sure whatever we did, because we'd made a mistake. And when you talk about taking responsibility for that mistake, that responsibility lies with me, Alison Broom, because we are the chief executives and it's an operational matter. We made the mistake. We had to make sure that when those people got that planning application, in the end, their decision, be it what they want or not, that it is one that is legally sound. We weren't certain. And, you know, there is still dubiety out in the Twitter sphere. So we had to get the thing, and that's why we did it. And the delays were just a shorthand of the key things that happened. We had there was at least 4 or 5 conversations a day between those, and emails going backwards and forwards saying, what about this? Have you spoken to so-and-so? And bearing in mind, we weren't just doing this with our council, we were also talking to Maidstone. And our comms teams had to talk to each other, and our planning staff had to talk to each other. The leader spoke with the leader of Maidstone. All of these things happened, not relevant to this, because this is about but there were no delays. There were days of work that happened in the meantime.
Thank you. Councillor Dender.
Thank you, Chair, and I beg your indulgence. I'm jumping ahead a bit, but it is in relation to the point we're just discussing. Page 13, recommendation 4 from the auditor, from the audit department. And I quote, "This incident showed significant misunderstanding and lack of clarity in how to deal with mistaken publication. MKPS should work with relevant planning service to develop a clear understanding of how to deal with any future incidents." Before I go on, let me say, I apologise if it appeared I was putting blame on anybody. That was not my intention. What I want to do is get to the detail of how we make sure it doesn't happen again. That's what I'm after. And part of that is testing procedures of IT, obviously coming from my experience. But this also is a very valid statement. And it does quite specifically say there was significant misunderstanding of how to deal with the mistaken publication. That was from the shared service audit.
Thank you, Chairman. So just to clarify, I believe that that recommendation relates to the fact that the member of staff that was undertaking the testing, their immediate response was to delete the notices that they created. Not understanding that there was a legal consideration there. As a consequence of that and the recommendation, we've now introduced a new procedure, which has been agreed across Mid-Kent Planning Support and the Planning Services team, to make clear what the protocol is in such a situation and ensure that staff don't react in the incorrect way and delete notices that could be valid. So in relation to recommendation 4 specifically, the protocol now is that if a notice is issued in error, in the first instance, that's flagged with James Freeman or the head of planning at Maidstone Borough Council, that they will take legal advice before agreeing on what action is to be taken, and that if there is a decision to remove a notice, to withdraw it, that is restricted to the planning support manager, with other members of staff having that access removed, so that there's real clarity in terms of who's making that decision, the factors that they consider in reaching that decision.
Can we get some feedback?
Yeah, but if I may, in answer to what Steve said, I thought was a very useful answer, but is there involvement, therefore, with the relevant portfolio holders at that point in that discussion that you're having with legal?
We would see it primarily as a legal issue in terms of the route to take, but no doubt Mr. Freeman would contact the cabinet member to keep them updated in terms of any incident. But primarily it's a legal issue and making sure that staff understand, and certainly the procedure that's been created makes clear to staff what the implications are of those decisions, and as I say, kind of proper considerations that need to be given.
Just coming back to the actual incident, I seem to have an echo now as well. It was mentioned a few minutes ago about that it was picked up or reported by a member of the public. So the question is, A, how did that happen? Why was it not picked up through our own checks and balances? And had that member of the public not picked it up, what would have been the situation? Or I presume this would have happened potentially again. So what have we put in place to ensure that actually we're not reliant on members of the public to respond or to let us know where something has possibly failed?
Thank you, Chairman. One of the recommendations within the report relates to how we manage the risk of similar situations going forward. As part of that, the intention is that before any testing is undertaken for any system change, not just within planning support, but across the kind of whole range of systems that the council operates, the ICT work collectively with the service department to undertake a thorough risk assessment, identifying these kind of potential risks and making sure that they build in mitigation from the start. The agreement being that that testing will not commence until both the service and ICT are satisfied that there's a comprehensive risk assessment in place.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the second or the next part, the actual investigation and report itself. So point 4 to 7, any questions? Again, just to reiterate, I think actually as a report, it is a very, very good report. Councillor Henderson.
Yeah, just picking up, and I am going to keep on coming back on saying that I think the key is resolving the problem that happened 3 years ago, not the problem that happened in August. And so I would want to clarify, why was there ever a system in operation which tested on a live application? Why don't we do the tests on dummy applications? Because then it doesn't matter if we publish them in the front of the Radio Times. I mean, what the hell?
Thank you, Chairman. So the testing itself was undertaken on the basis that the test system was kind of isolated. So that there was no connection to the live public access or risk that documents would be put into the public domain. It looked to copy across live applications into a test environment to get a real life example, if you like, in terms of how the software change would be applied.
Yeah, sorry, all my experience coming to bear here, but what I've read on this report and what's just been said, I find mind-blowing. You say isolate into a test system. I've done this so many times over the years. Yes, you isolate it. You put it on a different server. You put boundaries in. You make sure there's absolutely no ways it can go anywhere near the live system. You don't rely on a one line of code. That's crazy. You just don't do that. So again, this is not seeking blame. This is to say that the team across in Maidstone really should get their act together and be told to put a proper protocol in place that this cannot happen. To say that it could happen at any time is nonsense. If you do the proper protocols in place and you copy that live system across to another server or with boundaries between the different servers in the systems, it can't happen, regardless of one line of code. And I will again pick up on the point here, and it's in recommendation number 2 on page 12, although MKICT have already corrected procedures to address the known error, the lack of knowledge may still leave Uniform and other systems vulnerable. That is frightening. So ICT must get onto that, and they must get onto it like now, because that is really frightening. The auditor has quite correctly picked up the massive risk there. One line of code? No, absolutely not. Again, I'm looking to the future and what we do to plug the gaps in the future to make sure it doesn't happen again. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. The management response within the appendices kind of does recognise the fact that improvements in terms of risk management would address that situation. So the intention going forward is that ICT and service departments look at all such risks before making any further system changes. So I don't disagree with the point, and certainly the management response is to make sure that we build in those safeguards.
Can I just check? Again, the way I'm interpreting that is so that going forward, that any work like this or any updates, testing, whatever to any system will be done on a not live package system, whatever you want to call it. But I appreciate there are times where you may have to do that. In those cases, that explicit permission and notification will be sent to Maidstone and Swale and whoever else needs to sign it off, so they are absolutely aware that this test is happening on a public live system and any risks associated to it. Otherwise, anything else, download a snapshot, whatever it is, but it's not on any live system.
Thank you, Chairman. So just to be absolutely clear, this wasn't testing on the live system. So there's 2 instances of the uniform system. A copy of the live system was carried across and put into a test environment, so quite separate. The error occurred because a line of configuration that was carried across in error from the live system directed documents to a third system, which is the public access and where residents view the documents. So there were 2 independent systems. It was the configuration and link to a third system that created the issue in this instance.
So in which case, are you now don't switch your mic off. Thank you. That's right. Are you therefore confident that this line of code or whatever it was that caused this issue to occur has been absolutely rectified and cannot possibly happen again, whether it's a live, closed, whatever system, that we've gone through this line and any other lines to check that this cannot happen again?
Thank you, Chairman. So that amendment has been made, and the procedures within the ICT department in terms of how they prepare the test system has been amended to ensure that error cannot happen again. I accept that there could be different issues which we would hope to, or which we would look to address through an improved approach to understanding and addressing risks before we undertake any exercise. So that particular instance won't happen again, but we are looking broader than that to ensure that we can learn lessons across any type of system change rather than just this one specifically.
Just a quick comeback. I understand what you're saying about the test bed and then going to a third system, but of course the real question is the third system shouldn't have been live either. There should be no pass through to a live system for printing. That should have been a test system as well. But I mean, we're going into a lot of detail now. If I get a chance to have a chat with Chris, I'll have a chat with him. But yeah, there are many lessons to be learned here. I'm sure Chris will pick up on them all. Have we still got some way to go on the main report?
Just a very quick one. Having heard all of that, I'm quite encouraged that the officers and those in charge of these things are going to try to ensure in the future that the same thing doesn't happen again. I've been involved in massive IT projects that publish to live systems, and we always built a firewall that actually worked. My question, I guess, Chairman, is just to the leader, just to ask him if he is satisfied with what he's heard tonight, and that he feels that the thing is being properly addressed.
Within my knowledge, limited knowledge of Unicorn and all that sort of thing, yes, but clearly both I and the Chief Executive will be keeping a close look on this over the next certainly 6 months and beyond that.
Section, the context. Any questions on the context? Councillor Davey.
Thank you, Chair. That's looking backwards a little bit. Could anyone explain the reasons why the joint service was created back in 2014, and why Tunbridge Wells Borough Council decided to pull out from the system in 2016? Thank you, Chair.
Can you repeat that, please, Councillor Davies? Sorry.
Yes, just referring to paragraph 9. Why back in 2014 it was decided to join the planning systems up, and what was the reason for Tunbridge Wells withdrawing from the partnership in 2016? I know it's retrospective, but I'm interested.
So I've had a long conversation with Alison Broom about this, who was the chief exec at Maidstone when this came in. There were several reasons why we joined around resilience, and it saved a significant amount of money. I think it would be not overstating to fact that say that when it started, it was a bit of a disaster. It was not how it is now, and there was a year of a huge amount of pain for all of the councils. And Tunbridge Wells took the decision that they didn't want to be part of it, and they withdrew. So they sort of got the pain without the gain, if you like. It was initially project managed by Tunbridge Wells, but that wasn't. It's a partnership. It's 3 groups of staff, and there were just lots of things that hadn't been reckoned on when we started. And again, at that time, shared services weren't as well, they weren't as advanced as they are today. And there were just a lot of issues, and a lot of people had a bad experience applying for planning. And for some people, that pain is not forgotten, even though since that time there has been no further issues.
Yeah, in item 13, it quite boldly says Mid-Kent ICT provide local uniform support and administration. MKICT is a shared service. Can I ask whether it was ever looked at whether indeed MKICT should have provided support to this uniform system, because they clearly didn't know how it worked. I don't want to change the subject, but I've had several dealings with Mid-Kent ICT. They have been universally frustrating, and just as an example, we have been trying to transfer the All Gunpowder Works website from Swale Council to the Friends of the All Gunpowder Works, and 5 years later it's still not been transferred. So I simply question whether we ever looked at whether Mid-Kent ICT was the right group to provide support to this system.
Sorry, Chairman, that's not a response to Councillor Henderson. I just wanted to extend the answer I'd given to Councillor Whiting to say that I've asked another member of the Cabinet to join the strategic board, so there's 2 of us there. So if For example, in September, I was not well, so we had no representation. We will in future.
Thank you, Chairman. So, first of all, apologies if you've had a poor experience in terms of the website, and I'd certainly be happy to look at that and make sure that we can resolve that for you. In terms of the administration of the uniform system, it's provided by ICT, but with support from iDocs, who's the software provider as well. So it's a kind of partnership of the two.
Thank you, Chair. It's really a general answer to Councillor Davies' question. I wasn't here when the MICAMP was formed, so I can't comment on that. But from an IT man's perspective, it's very difficult to get the infrastructure you need. Swale Borough does not have the money to have the infrastructure we need for these big systems. So you have no choice by bringing in a third party, the bigger the better, quite frankly, and obviously combining your support so you've got enough resource. These systems cost a great deal of money, fortunes, most of them, and Swale Borough just couldn't afford to pay for them. So you've got to have partnerships to pay for them and for the support as well. And even Mid-Kent, of course, doesn't have that much resource on support. Since I've been at KCC, I have to say Cantium, which is wholly owned by KCC, I find really good. I do find them really good, actually. But they are massive. It's a big company. It's a really big company. So, of course, if you don't get one guy, you get another guy, you can get another guy, and you just work your way down. They've got the resources to do it, and they've got massive infrastructure. Swale Borough couldn't afford that. So from an IT point of view, you have no choice but to have shared services. That's the point I'm making. I think it's from a technical point of view. I just wanted to make that point. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, summary findings. Questions, comments? And that's labouring on the point. Councillor Henderson's mentioned it. Someone got Councillor Mike Whiting. Can you switch your microphone off for a second? I've got a question myself. Can you turn the microphone off for a moment? Thank you. Keeps coming back. So this dates from 3 years ago. Are we absolutely certain that there's now not going to be anything sitting behind that could be 3 years old, maybe even older, that could come back and sort of bite us in the behind going forward? Has that issue, because tonight could have been 3 years ago, tonight could have been 2 years from here. The fact it's happened now is coincidental. The fact it's happened, but could have happened at any particular time. So are we sure we have got steps in place to make sure that won't happen again? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yep, I can give you a complete assurance that we are absolutely clear in terms of what the issue was and that corrective action has been taken.
Thank you. Councillor Whiting.
Just some notes I made when I was reading this, and the word sort of damning comes up, the word unacceptable comes up. Looking at a number of the findings, the councils had not developed secure enough surrounding controls to prevent the risk, which I think in paragraph 15. I'd just like to have confirmation, perhaps from the officers, that the procedure notes have been now rewritten or are being rewritten, so that in paragraph 19 it refers to MKICT faithfully following procedure notes. It would be reassuring to know that they had been rewritten. On paragraph 20 on page 11, at the top of page 11, I just find it unacceptable that there were, it says here, had almost no controls governing planning or performing the system testing. These are quite damning statements. They're not ones that we're making as councillors. They're ones that the audit team are saying. So I really do hope that that all of this is being taken with the seriousness that those 3 or 4 excerpts that I've just mentioned would indicate that we need to take seriously, and that we are going to put it right in the way you suggested, and that there will be some oversight to ensure that happens, but not over the next year, but over the next, as Councillor Truelove said, over the next 6 months, he's going to have his hand all over this, and I really welcome that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Whiting, I mean, just to say that we were keen to get this work commissioned because we want to learn the lessons through this process to make sure it doesn't happen again. So there's an absolute commitment to kind of follow through on those actions. A number have already been completed, like the example of the procedure note for staff in when or should such an incident occur, the risk assessments or the risk registers that are referenced in recommendation 1 have been completed. There is further work to be done around the kind of controls to make sure that we understand all the risks before starting any testing, because that's a much bigger piece of work. We really welcome the offer of support from the audit team to get that right. And I'm kind of aware that the head of ICT is going to take a personal kind of interest and control over that to make sure it's completed.
I'm grateful, Chairman. Just a quick comeback, whether or not it might be good to have an update on the work that's just been described, perhaps say in 6 months' time, back to this committee, so that we can all be reassured that the very well-meaning and I'm sure believed words are actually going to take some sort of action, that we can be happy that things are moving in the direction that's been described. Thank you.
Thank you. One slight issue with that is that in about 6 months' time, this scrutiny committee may not actually exist. So I can, whichever is the appropriate committee as a update.
I don't think Councillor Whiting meant to be literally 6 months to the day. I would have thought we'd got a pretty good idea in 5 months' time, and you could still have your scrutiny committee then.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to put that as a recommendation. I'm going to actually take that as this committee, unless anyone completely disagrees with that we should have that anyway. So at some point between now and next May, an update on progress. Councillor Davey.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'd like to refer to paragraph 21, section 21, where it says the Commons did not seek to express any view on the applications. I think there may be some damage limitation required going forward, because however we may see that statement there, when these applications go forward, I think a couple have gone forward already, if they go against either the applicant or someone who's opposing the application, then they may believe that there may be of some sort of subliminal predetermination in some of the comments made, and on the back of that, the initial press release said they were randomly selected applications, yet in the report it says they were chosen, and I wonder why, say particularly within say the demolition of a pub or the Happy Palms Ranch, why such a controversial application was chosen rather than someone who was, I understand perfectly what Larissa said about testing 100% live, but surely it was someone converting a garage into an extra room or putting a fence up, than something that if it had gone wrong could have such a massive fallout. Thank you, Chair.
Can we also just clarify that point you say, whether were these random or were these actually specifically chosen sites?
So
Yeah, and the point Councillor Davies is making is the subliminal predetermination by the officers. None of these officers involved in this have got any idea about any of these applications. They'd have no influence on the applications. So you know, what you're concerned about is unlike, well, it's impossible to that have any effect on the determination of a planning application. Now, before you come back, Rich is going to deal with the.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the specifics of how the sample was chosen, what the officer did was that they organised all of the applications, looking only at the application number, into a long list according to the date they were received, and they simply picked the first 6 off of that list. So the officer undertaking the test was blind to any of the circumstances of individual applications at the time they selected the sample.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Okay, I understand fully Councillor Truelove's point. I'm not talking about the officers, I'm talking about the public perception that there may have been some predetermination, because that may well be in the back of their mind if their application is turned down or approved. And is it, sorry, Richard, is it up the back? Yeah, I refer to page 17, which says the officer chooses 12 cases, which obviously I picked up on because it indicated that he may have had a degree of choice. And now you've explained it, he kind of chose the first 12 without any idea what the application was. It was just that with the initial press release on the 7th, he said they were randomly chosen, and that made it looked a little bit more specific in that particular paragraph there. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, if I may. I think we use the term random because the person didn't know anything about them. From an auditor's perspective, for something to be random, it has there has to be just kind of throw it up in the air. They didn't. There was some, but we use the phrase random because it wasn't. They said, "I'll do this one, this one, this one." I think your point about if somebody gets a negative decision, they may perceive that kind of. That was always going to be that, because why wouldn't it be? And I think that's possible. The problem is we have to be guided by planning legislation, and there's nothing we can do that can make either, if we say no, someone says, well, they're always going to say no because of this, or if we say yes, for people to say, well, of course they said yes because they mucked it up. So we are in a no-win situation as far as that. So all we can do is be really clear about the process and that the decision is made on planning grounds. And I'm certain that the planning committee, if there was a hint of that, would be very robust in their response.
Okay. On point 21, is there, I mean, I'm not saying for a second that people should not be working from home. I'm assuming that this occurred from somebody who was working at home at that particular time, and that's absolutely fine. Is there a potential risk, however, that something like this and testing on a system in an environment that is very, very safe and informal, and I'm sitting at home, I could be doing this in my socks and whatever, could actually add to the chances of like the comments which were put on, because I'm at home, nobody's going to see it, nobody's here to actually see it, so I can make these, irrespective of whether it's a live or closed system, make these comments regarding this piece of work and these applications. If this had been carried out in an office where potentially other people may have been present to pass by, not necessarily involved in, but there is some sort of visibility to this activity, would that have reduced the chances of this sort of thing occurring? And if it does, then I think there's some consideration needs to be put going forward of whether the activities like this should be done in a home environment. If anyone.
I mean, the answer is, Chairman, who knows? But I think we ought to try and focus on what we're actually concerned about. Clearly, these flippant comments were unprofessional, but they were made by people who actually believed, you know, they had a wall around them. The real issue, I would have thought, for this evening and for us going forward is the systemic failure, and that's really the issue. and that doesn't really bear on whether the particular officers were at home or not. I mean, who knows? People working together in an office might enjoy saying something what they think is funny, and they think there's no risk of it going live. So that could happen in an office just as much as working at home. But it's a fair question, but I'm not sure that is the issue for us. I think it's the systemic problems that we're really actually most concerned about.
Just picking up a bit of that and what we've heard, I think the answer to what Councillor Truelove has just said, I think we've kind of agreed. You know, there is a way forward. There are some plans in place. We'll be updated on those as we move forward. And I think that's a really good one. And that's a good way forward. I do have to draw the leader's attention to the press release that went out subsequent to this mistake being made. That he was angered, he and the deputy leader were angered and frustrated by an administrative error by staff working at the Mid-Kent Shared Planning Service. Now, what we've heard tonight is actually it wasn't the Mid-Kent Planning Service, it was the IT error. And I just wonder whether the leader would like to just sort of kind of retract the statement and be assured in the future that these kind of reactive press releases are dealt with more sensitively.
If you can, on that I think that sort of issue, a very good point. This part of the conversation, I think, on the second part. So I want to get in terms of how Slough Borough Council reacted, how we led, etc. That fourth part in there. So hold fire on that. It's been noted. We will come back to it, but I'll keep this particular part distinctly separate. Councillor Zender.
Thank you, Chair. I'm slightly crossing into that, but only slightly. Para 17, yes, and I quote, if I can find it now, 16 actually, sorry. It meant the test system handed over to MKICT was unknown to MKPS, configured in a way, And then referring to paragraph 21, the officer believed the likelihood risk of publication was 0, and at the end, the officer could have no knowledge of. Now, my question is very simple. I think what Councillor Truelove said about the comments, they are a red herring, they're irrelevant. My team used to put all sorts of strange comments on test systems. The relevance is, and I hope that this planning officer has not been taken to task, has not been disciplined, has not suffered from this at all. Because in my view, it is no ways his fault in any way, shape or form. And I'd like an answer that if he is okay and that has not happened. Just to pick up your point, Chair, working from home, you're sort of slightly on the right track, but working from home is not an issue. It's behind a firewall, in a VPN. But if you are working in the office, in my teams, there was always a sounding board. You are right in that respect. So if you're sitting there and you're doing these things, there's always somebody around, and it's great. You have a quicker chat with them and say, hold on, wait a minute, you know. So it can be useful to be in the office because you've got other people to talk to. That used to work exceptionally well. It's horrible being isolated at home when you're doing that. It's something to do with the technology. It's to do with the psychology of having a team around you. So I would say there is a point on that, but it's more a case, not technologically, but you have somebody around you to have a chat with. The other two, I think, yes, I agree with Councillor Whiting, but we've said it to come back to us. The other two I'll bring up when we get to recommendations. Okay, thank you.
Just so in terms of the actual reports, whoever the person was, we do not know whether it was a he or she, and we don't need to know that, but I'm hoping that what the statement that was...
So I was going to refer to the member of staff as they. They were investigated or as part of the investigation, but also spoken to, because whilst I completely accept everything people say, what made this newsworthy was not decisions being made in error. It was the comments that made it newsworthy. They said straight away, huge regret. There has been no action taken at all against those members of staff. I think, as I said on the radio interview, it's a very wise person that can never say they said something in hindsight they wish they hadn't said, but there have been no action taken against that member of staff.
If I could just come back quickly, Chair. Thank you for that, Larissa. And I'm glad to hear no action's been taken. That's a real relief. However, there's an irony here. Because if she or he, they had not put on those comments, the public wouldn't have spotted it. They would have taken them as real.
Thank you, Councillor Dender. Okay, move on to the actual recommendations. So there are 4 listed. Any questions, comments, or anything to add? Councillor Dender?
Yes, I have 2 recommendations. I hope other people with me on this. One is, although I accept Mr. McGuinness's point about on the other table, ICT are picking up and doing certain things, but I think I would like to see specifically training of IT personnel and others on uniform, specifically mentioned as part of the recommendations. Okay, so some form of training being done to pick up their knowledge of uniform. I understand they're getting support from IDEX, but I think they need more training, maybe by IDEX, to get a better understanding of it. So that's my first recommendations. The second is the head of planning signature. I'm afraid it's not satisfied me what I've heard tonight. I'm puzzled because that planning application is a legal document, but yet we are saying that anybody, we're saying there's checks and balances, but I still haven't heard anything to persuade me that there is a proper check, that the signature gets onto that application only when we're absolutely sure the application is valid or real or proper. That has surely got to be improved in the process, however you do it. So that would be my second recommendation. I hope I get a second.
Right. Thank you. Okay, we'll do the, if we can, the first one first. We'll do the first one second. No, sorry. So the first one about in terms of the training of the ICT personnel on the uniform to address the knowledge. I think part of that is also there's an addition to that in terms of a skills analysis of what already is there, which then feed into that. But I'm happy to second that. If we do the 2 recommendations separately, I think I'm happy to second that. Any members wish to comment on that?
Chairman, if I may, just to say, the really important bit is that the ITC personnel have a really thorough brief from the service department and a thorough conversation with the service department to make sure that they're going to be delivering what it is the service department wants to deliver. And I don't see that anywhere in these recommendations, but perhaps that could be included in the one you've just been proposed and seconded.
Okay, right. Members happy with that? Okay, I'll just quickly run through. I have to for this. If we can say yay or nay, I am. Oh, I'll second it on that one. Thank you. I'm in favour of that. For Queen naming for or against or abstain. Councillor Davey, Councillor Dender, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Gould's not here. Councillor Hall's not here. Councillor Jackson. Thank you. Actually, put the tick in the right box. That helps. Councillor Jays is not here. Councillor Knights. Councillor Lee McCall's not here. Where is everybody? Councillor Neal. Thank you. Councillor Pugh. Councillor Stevens is not here either. And oh, you're still, yeah, sorry. How could I forget you, Councillor Henderson? Oh, thank you. So that's been carried. Oh, Councillor Watts. I was going well with this.
You should have done it.
Okay, Councillor Dender, can you you and Ms. Councillor White just confirm the recommendations exactly for Joe for the minutes. So if you can.
The second one.
The first one again, and the second one. First one first.
The first one, yeah, specifically to mention training, further training of ICT staff and other relevant staff on the uniform system. Yeah, and also to better work with the various departments or the various staff on how to apply the system to planning.
Thank you. Okay, I know she's listening on the call. If you can pop a message, Joe, is that okay? And the second recommendation relating to the electronic signatures or onto the documents, Councillor Tender, if you can repeat that. Yeah, to look at a very much more controlled check and balance, check system to ensure that applications only go forward with a digital signature from the head of planning when they are fully validated and made sure that they are proper. Councillor Gibson, are you seconding that?
No.
Right.
I'd just like to make a comment on it, if I may.
Okay.
I just see severe difficulties in, short of Mr. Freeman actually sitting at his desk going through every application. I don't know how we're going to achieve that. So if Councillor Dennett could perhaps give me a bit of a clue what we're looking at, are we in a better position to vote?
Councillor Dennett.
Yeah, I was in no way suggesting that Mr. Freeman would be looking at every application, but he did mention earlier checks and balances. The checks and balances on this occasion failed. And they got very close to failing before as well. The application is a legal document, so it very much concerns me that they may get through without proper validation, without the proper checks. And I really think that ought to be looked at in detail, and possibly the flow and the process be documented and brought back to us.
It might be helpful for this discussion to know that typically in the decision notice publication process, you need 3 people. You need a planner to put it into the system, you need a planning manager to approve it, and you need a planning administrator to push the button to publish it. So typically there is that separation of duties. What happened in this testing was that purely for the purposes of this testing, one officer was granted all 3 permissions in order to do the testing. And so my suggestion is that the recommendation about greater specificity around how testing is undertaken and a greater analysis about exactly what permissions are needed for people in the course of undertaking testing might provide the reassurance that the councillor is seeking.
Actually, it doesn't. I'm sorry, but it doesn't. From words that have been said tonight, I take your point about the testing, absolutely, and it should never have happened there. And even on a test, having 3 people doing it, you wouldn't allow that anyway. But I still have a concern, something the Chief Executive said earlier, with all that mass, those massive applications, that you can't expect them to go all to get through, if you have too much checks and balances. But sorry, I'm paraphrasing.
Sorry, Councillor, that is not what I said.
No.
I said you couldn't expect the head of planning to be able to check them.
No.
What I said was we had the checks and balances, which is the planning officer and the planning manager, and they can check them. So I just want to be very clear. I didn't say that you couldn't expect them to be checked. I said you couldn't expect them to be checked by the head of planning.
No, I understand you said that, and I didn't say you said that, but I'm still not clear and not satisfied that the applications are being legally approved properly. What I've heard tonight does not yet satisfy me that they're being legally approved in the proper way.
Yeah, thanks, Chairman. Can I just put us back to the reason we're here tonight? It's not to discuss how planning applications are signed off by the head of planning, 2,000 a year, whatever the figure was. It's to understand how we can improve on and understand the issues surrounding the mistakes that were made in the testing environment. And they're completely too, with due respect to Councillor Dender, I'm more than happy to second much of what he says, but we're here to look at and understand what went wrong in the testing environment. We're not here to look and understand what happens as day-to-day business within planning. If that wants to come back to scrutiny, we can do that, I'm sure. And I'm quite satisfied that if it's been a simple matter of not using Mr. Freeman's signature in the test, but putting up a dummy signature, Mickey Mouse or anybody else, would have solved this problem, because they would not then have been legally binding. So I think that's a lesson to be learned. And while I fully understand why you need to test in such a way that you can be assured that when you go live, it's going to work, that simple measure would have been good enough. So I just want to pull back from investigating or understanding how Mr. Freeman might sign off and what checks and balances are in place for 2,000 or 3,000 planning applications a year, because that's not what we're here for tonight. We're here to look at the testing regime, and I think we've uncovered some issues with that, which I'm sure officers will take away and act upon and report back in due course. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I appreciate what Councillor Dender's saying, but I still would like some steer from Larissa in that when you test the system, that you need to have everything in place to test it fully, and that if we were using dummy signatures, that they wouldn't somehow end up on genuine applications. I kind of understand what Councillor Dender's saying, but I'd like a bit of a steer on this, because the idea is to test the system 100% as if it was going to be published. Otherwise, you can't find any faults on the way. Thank you, Chair.
Oh, that would be a brave chief executive that says, yes, that will never happen, because someone's going to remember. I think there is an issue that if we can take the signatures off and it not affect the testing, then that is clearly something we should do. What we don't want to do is create something that's artificial, that when you go and do it in real life, it doesn't work. Now, I have to declare a complete non-interest in the fact I don't know how computers work. If it doesn't change when I turn it off and turn it back on again, I have no idea. So I don't know, unlike Councillor Dendell, what we can do. What we can say is clearly we know that this testing, either through the way that we did it, we know there are severe weaknesses, and we're working, and that's what Steve has said. We will look to see if by taking the signature off that helps. We don't even know if that changes. We need to get some advice. If that's the case and it doesn't negatively impact the decision, of course we will do that. We will do whatever we can to make it safe and not run the risk of sitting here in a year's time with me trying to explain to you why I thought it was a really good idea that Mickey Mouse is our new head of planning, because that just would be a complete disaster. But the problem is that's when we just need to be careful that we're trying to solve a problem and we don't create another problem by solving it. Just one other thing that I think is, if we have the planning so we have the planning and the planning manager, the next person in the line is James. So if we have another check and balance, who is that check and balance that's not the planning manager or the planner or the person in that presses the print button, and he said the play button? Who is that person? And I think whilst I understand what you're saying, Councillor Dendell, that's looking at how we resource this. In my world, I don't know who would do it if it was somebody above the planning manager that's not James. So that would be my question.
Very briefly, thank you, Larissa, for the answer. And you made perfect sense. I'd be quite happy to support Councillor Dender on this if we could get some advice from our IT people, as in saying, right, okay, we can do a test and we are able to remove these signatures in all test procedures, and it will never happen when we actually publish a real document that it comes up on the portal without a signature and therefore is invalid. So I think we could get some advice from IT on it, if that's possible. Thank you, Chair.
Right, I've waited so long, I forgot what I was speaking about, but I'll come back if I can shortly. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, it's just a reply really. I think maybe I've not put it very well. The word I picked up earlier, I don't know who said it, was automatic, or maybe I imagined it, I don't know. Digital signature is something I've dealt with all through my career. The point is, if the system puts them on automatically, that's my issue, automatically. Or is there's a positive action to say, your planning manager or whoever says, I agree with this. And I don't assume that it is agreed. That's my issue. That is absolutely my issue. I've seen this happen so many times. The processes, and I'm not blaming any particular person, but the processes get lackadaisical. And you pass through 20 at a time and say, oh, well, I'll put all the signatures on in one go. And you press a button and 20 signatures go on. I wouldn't like to think that's happening. That was my point. I wasn't suggesting that you put another person in, but it's the process of how you put the digital signature on that I was referring to. And as Councillor Davey has said, and Councillor Whiting, specifically, of course, on the test system, don't have them at all. They shouldn't be on there at all. So I'll amend my recommendation to that, if that's okay.
And if it puts your mind at rest, I can confirm that on All Live, no signature is added. The system adds the signature, and it might have been me that had the poor choice of the word automatic, but the signature cannot be added until the planning officer and the planning manager have approved it. And then when the button is pressed, once those two approvals are in the hand of the planning support officer, that's when the signature is added, when there is that audit trail. What went wrong in the testing was there were no two bits because of the way the permission. So changing it from the test, I think, is good. And if we can take the signature off, absolutely.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. I'm just going to agree with Larissa in terms of kind of exploring the opportunities to remove the signature. But I did want to kind of highlight that recommendation 3 within the report looks at the kind of controls around testing kind of across the board. You know, we've got hundreds of different systems. Some will have electronic signatures, others will have other kind of unique identifiers or pieces of information that are critical. I think in delivering recommendation 3, what we can do is build a kind of process and safeguards that work across the whole range of those systems. So I think for me, that's really the key for us. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Councillor Henderson and Councillor Marchington next. Before we bring you in, can we, Councillor Dendor, actually, again, for the purpose of the minutes, when we get to it, can you think we need to go back through exactly what your recommendation is for Joe in a moment? I'll come back to you once we've spoken. So if you want to get ready for that, please. Councillor Henderson.
That's what I'd like to address. We have been debating for about the last quarter of an hour a proposal which is not clear and in any case is completely confused, because Larissa has explained very clearly, and it's something we all ought to know, that when an actual planning application is being approved, it has a 3-stage approval, and therefore a digital signature from James is not a problem. And the problem arose, as somebody said over there, because in testing the system, we gave one person all 3 of those authorities. So may I suggest that since we have a very unclear proposal, which to the best of my knowledge has not been seconded, that we actually just leave it, and it is entirely clear that the officers know what we're getting on at and will look at it. I really do not think it needs yet more discussion of what the specific proposal is and whether we can support it.
Councillor Marchington.
Yes, thank you, Chair. You're going into a lot of detail about the authentication of signatures, but the comments made on this slip out that went public, the officer was able to put his own word in his own report. So why don't we just put in, this is a test document, and that's what they have to put in every time, and you haven't got to worry about the signatures.
I think in terms of the wording that will be used going forward, I think that's something that's been thought about, and yeah. Right, I'll come back to Councillor Dender.
Thank you, Chair. On Councillor Marchington's statement just now, I think we've covered that in the sense I said, Mr. McGuinness, that as well as having a test bed of live data, the actual portal or the test or the print system should also be a test system, which is similar to what Councillor Marchington has just said. So I think we've covered that. It's a damn good idea to put test all the way across, yes, but as long as you keep everything within the test environment, I think that's fine. I'm quite happy to change my recommendation simply to what Councillor Davies said, watch in the test system, take off signatures altogether. Simply that, simple as that.
So that proposal has been seconded. Joe, is that okay when you're listening on the phone if you want to comment? So it's to remove signatures from any test systems. Okay. Again, I'll run down, hopefully in the right order with names. I think personally, I think that makes sense. So I'll be for that. Councillor Davey, Councillor Dender, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Jackson, Councillor Knights, Councillor Neal, Councillor Pugh, Councillor Henderson, Councillor Whiting, and that is carried. Any other comments, questions in terms of the recommendations? Nope. And then the standards and independence. And the report distribution, there should be nothing in there. Okay. So, Councillor Dender.
Sorry. On the distribution list, and it's just a question, somebody will probably correct me. I noticed Chris Woodward is not on it. And considering all the issues with ICT, I wonder if that he shouldn't be on it.
So the distribution list went to the 3 senior staff, and we have distributed that amongst our staff, but it was the original distribution list that was agreed, and that was myself, Steve as the director, and Alison Broom. I have also shared it, well, I've shared it with all of you now, but I shared it initially with James and Chris had it, and but the actual the agreed distribution list there was just the 2 chief executives, but it has gone wider since, because the management, if you look at the appendix that's got the management response, they come from those officers.
Councillor Henderson.
Have we not missed the fact that there was a 3rd recommendation to debate from Councillor Whiting about a proper brief going from the service department in every case?
Does it give that?
It was something that I would like to commend to the committee chairman through you, that we recommend to our officers that kind of really close liaison and close briefing does take place, because that may, in my view, it may well have helped prevent what went wrong on this occasion. And I don't know if I got a seconder for that, but Councillor Henderson, thank you.
So it's been proposed by Councillor White and seconded by Councillor Henderson. Does anyone wish to say anything on that? Nope. Okay, we'll run through again the list. I'm for Councillor Davey, Councillor Dender, Councillor Gibson, Councillor Jackson, Councillor Knights, Councillor Neal, Councillor Pugh, Councillor Henderson, and Councillor Whiting. And that is carried. Thank you. Is that okay, Joe? Okay, any other comments, questions or recommendations from members? No, in which case, it's gone rather longer than I thought this particular part was. I'm going to take an adjournment for 5 minutes in a moment before we move on to the second part in terms of how we handled the leadership communication from a Stroud Borough Council perspective. Everyone's obviously more than welcome to stay, but if those from Mid-Kent don't want to or wish to head off home, thank you for your attendance this evening. It's much appreciated, and thank you for the report. I'll adjourn the meeting at 8:41. Back in at 8:45, please. Thank you. reconvene. Okay, thank you, members. I'll reconvene now at 8:47. Okay, so we thank you to everyone for that. Actually, that took longer than I thought it was going to, and it was a good discussion, I thought, and hopefully useful for all those involved. So the second part is actually I want to focus on Swale Borough Council's response to this and how we dealt with it. Again, at this point, I don't know whether if you want to say anything, Councillor Truelove.
Thanks very much, Chairman. I think it's important that during this part of the session that Councillor Mike Baldock is also given the opportunity to outline how we thought about it. If you go back to your timeline, just as a matter of information, I didn't know about this erroneous planning decision because I was on holiday in Suffolk and the chief executive rang me on the 25th of August. So it wasn't really until the 1st of September that I was back at work and able to think about the consequences of this. My initial view was that this was bound to get into the public domain, and that it was important that we made a statement of our response to the fact that this had happened. I thought it was really important to acknowledge that with 5 out of the 6 instances being in Swale, whatever embarrassment that was going to come out of this, whilst it wasn't actually directly related to people working in Swale Borough Council, people working for us through a partnership, nevertheless, we were going to endure quite a lot of public interest, and indeed we did, including the national media. And also I was really concerned that there would be a mass of social media comments going along as well, and they could become quite bizarre and quite destructive if we didn't get something out into the media. Now the question was asked earlier why there's a gap between the 1st and the 7th. Well, it was necessary to chat to the leader of Maidstone Council. It was also important that we didn't really make any kind of statement until we'd communicated with the applicants for the particular planning applications, and that did take a few days. So the gap between the 1st and the 7th includes the weekend, includes us making sure that the members of the public who, you know, were the victims of this mistake were informed by us before we made any sort of public statement, which these days, of course, you put out a press release, you don't have to wait a few days as in the past for the press to publish it. It's up on their social media for the media straight away. I was also conscious that this wasn't the first time that this service had caused great embarrassment to this council. So I remembered clearly enough, because I had to deal with lots of aggrieved members of the public in the early stages of this service. We had people waiting a year to have their applications verified. So this was a second whammy. Shouldn't say whack, should I? A second whammy really from this service. And whilst I clearly acknowledge that the Mid-Kent service is our service, nevertheless it's slightly at arm's length from the officers and the members in this council, and that's, you know, there's some implications to that. Conscious that we were going to get most of the flack, I wanted to get something out. Now, we've made it clear that we didn't want a victimisation of the people who had actually been involved in that. It emerged obviously that it was an IT problem. It's a systemic problem, and when it says that the leader and the deputy leader were angry, that's because we were angry. We really were, because it's quite clear that this error was going to have an adverse effect on the reputation of Swale Borough Council. And as far as I could see, in my clear thinking way, I couldn't see that we were really to blame. So, as I said, we wanted to get something out. Now, the question was asked earlier about the paragraph, the leader and the deputy leader say they are angered and frustrated that an administrative error by staff working in the Mid-Kent Shared Planning Service, that is what happened. It was people working in the service. It wasn't their fault, but it was people working in the service. The fault was with the IT system. So if we want to split hairs, you know, we could have made that distinction. I don't think we can check that now, but the reality is that our concern was not within any individual, but a systemic problem with a service that we are involved in and which we'd had a problem before. If you just turn over what we said, both Councillor Baldock and I working together, these areas will have to be rectified, but this will cause totally unnecessary concern to applicants. I think it's appropriate for the leadership of this council to express our sympathy to the applicants who've had their planning applications treated in this way. There was definitely a wish not to create a frenzy. So we did take time, and we did actually reconsider the press release quite frequently. And we said we will wait for the outcome of a proper investigation and then consider our appropriate response as a council. That is what we've done. It's come to informal cabinet on a couple of occasions. The searching questions you asked this evening, they were all asked by members of the informal cabinet. So that's where we are. Earlier in the evening, you were suggesting that, you know, I ought to take personal responsibility for not knowing that this system wasn't working, and that if you pressed a certain button printed, it would cause this furore. I do take responsibility, but I think reasonable people would know that I wouldn't really be able to intervene. But on this, I take full responsibility for this press release with Councillor Baldock. We were acting in the interests of this council, trying, though not with necessarily conclusive success, trying to prevent, you know, the following embarrassment that we got. We were in the national press. We were in the Scottish House Builders Association Gazette, or something to that effect. I think we probably made it to Australia. So it was hard. It will go away, all that. But I just feel that as the leadership, we needed not to just hide from it, because that really would look as though we were hoping it wouldn't go away. And if we had done that, then the content of those press covering in following days would have been much worse, because what we said here was actually quoted quite frequently by the national press. Clearly, they started out with the bizarre comments. Of course they did, but if you read down, even if you read the Mail, you'd find that they were actually including our press statement. So that was our response. Chair, I'll be happy to answer any questions, but I think if you can, could you bring in Councillor Baldock?
So, Councillor Baldock, if it's possible, do you want to add or any comments to that, please?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Councillor Baldock.
Thank you. There's not an awful lot to add, because the leader has covered a lot of the areas that we have been discussing. But yes, obviously I was really distraught when I heard about this. I'm concerned about the officers in planning, as they were the obvious first people that people would be talking about, and I wanted to make it quite clear that none of the planning officers at Swale had anything to do with this. I think it's important. There was wrong names were mentioned in the press later on, and it was really important that we protected our staff from any sort of gossip or people trying to guess who it may or may not have been. So that was uppermost in my mind when we came up through on this. And of course, the applicants, some sensitive cases, and you just knew that it was going to mean that those people potentially had a lot longer to wait until they got a determination, and that was really quite galling, really disappointing. So yes, we wanted to take action. We would like to have been able to do things differently to cause less inconvenience to people, but that wasn't possible. But no, thank you, Lloyd.
Thank you, Councillor Baldock. Okay, I'll open it up for members' questions. Councillor Whiting first.
Just a couple of things, Chairman, and apologies. I had to go and take an important phone call, and apologies for that. Just a couple of questions, really. I mean, I am still perplexed as to why the leader and the deputy leader felt the need to blame someone, which they clearly did in their press release. And I wonder whether the leader has had an opportunity to speak to that member of staff and explain himself to that member of staff, and apologise for putting some element of blame on him, because, as I said earlier, this wasn't actually a planning staff member's issue. It was an ITC issue over which the leader has responsibility, and not the leader. And I also wonder whether the leader took some advice from officers before issuing the press release with regard to the tone of it, and if he did, what that advice was. He mentioned in the release that Mid-Kent planning services have been plagued with issues in the past, but I wondered what he has to substantiate that particular comment. So there's a couple of questions there. It would have been nice. All I will say, in addition to all of that, it would have been nice if the portfolio holder had been here this evening. I appreciate that there may be reasons why he couldn't be, similar to the reasons why I couldn't be here 5 minutes ago. But it would have been nice that he had the courtesy to say, to appear before the Scrutiny Committee. And while we welcome him online, it would have been good to see him here and to answer some of those questions. And I note that the Chief Exec is penning some answers for the leader now, so I look forward to the answers.
I don't think she is, but
do you want your answer straight away?
One second.
Yeah.
In terms of, just to say for councillor or for the portfolio holder, I do understand that there were potential issues in his ability to get here. So if that was the case, I'd rather have somebody on the phone than not at all. Yes, I'd agree. I'd rather him in the chamber, but to have on the phone is better than nothing at all. So on that, Councillor Truelove, if you want to pick.
Yes, and can I just stress that all of my answers are my answers. The Chief Executive has just advised me of something which I will consider whether I will include in my answer or not. Were you in the room when I was actually introducing this? I'm not. You weren't. Okay. Yeah. No, that's fine. I really don't accept that there's anything in this press release which if others have they got it in front of them? No. If you've got the press release, I don't see quite honestly that you can say that I was trying to blame someone by actually referring to the service actually causing us embarrassment. If you weigh that, the impact on us and the fact that we haven't impacted on any individual person, if we'd named somebody or if we'd said something that anybody could narrow them down and say that's that person, that would be fine, but we didn't do that. As I said before, we were angered, and it is an error that occurred because planning officers were doing a test. We do know it's the result of an IT problem, but there was no intention. What good would it be to try and just attack an individual? That wouldn't solve any of our problems. And I just have to say that wasn't the intention at all. As to have I spoken to that person, apologised? Well, first of all, since I don't know who it was, and I shouldn't know who it was, it would be inappropriate for me to be involved in what is a personnel issue. And it isn't really appropriate for this Scrutiny Committee to inquire about that particular individual. Is the press release mine? Is mine and Councillor Baldock's? Absolutely. Do we take advice? We always take advice, but we don't necessarily always take that advice and change what we intend to do. And that would have been the situation in this place. So this would not have been issued without the officers giving me guidance. They did. It did actually, the guidance they give did actually modify what I was minded to say. So advice was taken. And the thing that the Chief Executive has just pointed out to me is if the portfolio holder ought to be here, I am, because I am the portfolio holder responsible for Mid-Kent services, and that is the subject of the scrutiny this evening.
I'll come back to you in a moment. Sorry, Councillor Trevor, can I just check what something just said? Maybe I interpreted that wrong. You said that the press release was yours and Councillor Baldock's, and on advice, potentially. But then you just said that officers modified it. So is this your press release, or is it?
No, I think I was quite clear about that. It is the wording of this is what I asked the comms department to send out. No question about that. But we did take time to think about it, and during the course of the week, we did make changes to it. But it's the responsibility for it lies with me.
Thank you. Councillor Whiting.
I'm really grateful for the leader for that response, and I think it's a very helpful one. I just wonder what the advice he received on his original draft was, and what changes he made to his original draft.
Well, you may wonder, but you'll stay wondering. Because the advice the Chief Executive gives to me and the monitoring officer gives to me is advice that is between ourselves.
And not FOIable, presumably.
I don't know how you would do that.
Monitoring officer would like to speak.
Through you, Chair. In principle, it's FOIable, but it would probably be exempted.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I have some questions on the Appendix 3, the timeline, which I hope is still under the remit of this part of the discussion. I'm referring back to 2019. There's not a specific month there where an intimate error was reported within uniform, and then in November a patch was published, and then a snapshot of the system was taken to prepare for testing. What I don't know, if possible, it could obviously go back to IT for answer later. I appreciate that. Is what the actual error was and how much of an issue it was, given the timeline from the initial report to the testing taking place. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. So the initial error was a problem in that the uniform system wasn't correctly carrying across the conditions that had been set by the planning officer into the decision letter. It was a very infrequent error, but to kind of mitigate the impact of that, the team were undertaking a 100% check of decisions that were generated to make sure that if there was an error, it was picked up and corrected before the notice was issued.
Any questions from others at this point? Okay, a couple from me. In terms of the people, the applicants thought that these planning erroneous decisions were made to. Did you or Councillor Baldock, has there been actually any personal contact made with them? Not an email, but an actual conversation with those people that have been directly affected by this.
The communication, I think, was from the monitoring officer. You did write to them. Yeah, they were written to. Conversations, I've certainly had no conversations with them. I'm not sure that'd be appropriate.
No.
Personal opinion, I think that actually would have been more appropriate as an error from Swale Borough Council or Maidstone Borough Council, and that hasn't affected someone, and a letter, I might say it and apologise, that's good, but a point of leadership here to those affected wouldn't have been, I don't think, too much trouble to say, hang on.
You've got to be aware that we're going through a legal process now. It really wouldn't have been appropriate. The legal case is me against Swale Borough Council, so it really wouldn't be appropriate.
All right. In terms of the actual press release, as well, you have a person who has been at the centre of this that made an error for a mistake, and no way should they be sort of punished for errors or failures in a system. But again, coming back from a leadership perspective, do you think that comments of being angry or angered and frustrated that an administrative error by staff, which you then later on refer to as a junior member of staff, now I appreciate you're not giving any names, but could that not be seen, if you were that person, that member of staff, I don't know whether they were junior or not, could that not potentially have made them think, oh, hang on a minute, I've done something wrong here. I've now got the leader of Swale Borough Council or the cabinet member of planning or whoever else saying, I am angered and I am frustrated by this. That actually they're going to feel much more stressed, much more pressured in a situation that actually is potentially bad enough as it is. I don't think those comments were particularly, in my opinion, wise or could have been put out better.
Well, I can only say that I hear what you say. I've made it clear that there was no attempt to victimise them. I think any pressure that they have felt would be much more because it became a national media frenzy, and I would have thought that they may have found that very difficult. I doubt whether they followed word for word our comments, and as I said, we were angry, and I think we were entitled to be angry on behalf of Swale Borough Council. And it's important that we acted quickly, because the media interest would grow very quickly. Two members of the council were spinning around one aspect of a planning application, I think before we actually got this out. So I hear what you say, but I don't agree. I think in terms of the potential, and as it was realised, embarrassment for this council, it was our responsibility to represent the council. We could, if you wanted, we could go back over lots of press releases and people could go, I don't think that was the right word there, or I don't think that was the right word there. We were acting in the interest of the council as quickly as we could, and this was the statement, and it wasn't intended to be harsh on any individuals who had actually written frivolous things, however, but it wasn't intended to be harsh on them. It was to make it clear that, you know, we're part of a service. As partners in that service, we were going to suffer quite a lot of obloquy, which the other member of the service was not, because, you know, the nature of what had happened there. I thought it was more than appropriate for us to say something. And I say again, if we hadn't said something, I think that would have been a dereliction of responsibility. And Councillor Whiting's question I didn't answer about previous problems with this service. I was referring to the over a year of chaos that we had. It goes back to about 2015, but it's a period of chaos there. That wasn't good for us then. That might have been a point to consider, as Tunbridge Wells clearly did. You know, that's in the best interest of us, though I was very interested in what Councillor Dender said about the need for a big system, which we probably couldn't afford.
Which leads nicely in, Councillor Dender.
Thank you. I wasn't going to talk on this, but I have to pick up on a few words from Councillor Truelove. Perception is all. I used to train my customer service teams. It doesn't matter damn what you say, it only matters what they think you say. And the perception out there, I can assure you, was that you were pointing a finger. Absolutely. I spoke to many, many people who read that press release, and their perception, whatever you meant, and I understand you probably didn't mean to, but their perception was that you pointed the finger. And I totally back up Councillor Bowen's point, that officer felt that he had not been supported. If I'd been in his position, I would have felt the same, that the finger was being pointed directly at me. He was embarrassed enough about the jokey remarks he made. And as I've said earlier, those jokey remarks are a red herring. They're irrelevant, totally irrelevant. The issue is the test system, getting onto the live system. His remarks or her remarks were irrelevant. It didn't matter. It made good news, yes. But to point the finger directly at him, because that, or at them, and at Mid-Kent, I think, gave the perception out to the public. And it was that perception that I think was wrong. Whatever you meant, that perception was, it was what happened.
Okay, I mean, this could become repetitive with you keep repeating that you don't agree with what I did, and me saying, well, I do agree with what I did. The perception of finger pointing isn't in this at all, but it may have been in the number of people who jumped on social media and posted things such as the leader of Swellborough Council, who is after all a Labour man, is persecuting an individual. Now, I can understand how the perception would spread if for some reason some members of this council thought that that was the appropriate thing to do in the interest of this council very, very soon after we issued the press release. So you may talk to people who condemn what I did. It may be that that is your circle. I haven't come across anybody. The only instances that I've seen of anybody saying that I wanted to persecute somebody, which I clearly did not, was when I had a look at some social media, which I think had its origins in this council very soon after the publication of the press release, really stirring people up who very plausibly, when you mentioned the word, or not you, but whoever did that, mentioned the word Labour, perhaps not, not all that friendly towards Labour, and thought that this was something to spread around. And you're quite right, it did spread around, so there was a perception, but it was a false perception, and it was enhanced by members of this council.
If I could come back, Chair. Sorry, I feel quite offended by that. Councillor Truelove knows me well enough that when I talk to people out on the street, it's non-partisan. I do not bring politics into what I do. You ought to know me well enough by now, as I think other opposition members here can also confirm. I will try and work for the residents. And I can assure you the people I'm talking about, the perception I'm talking about is nothing to do with political parties, nothing whatsoever. The fact is they believed what you said. And in their minds, they were already on a witch hunt towards Mid-Kent and towards this planning officer. And it was not political, no political party was ever mentioned by anybody I ever spoke to. And don't look at social media, because I don't really. I ignore social media, quite frankly. I think it's a total waste of time. These are people I speak to on the street, at my hall, wherever I am walking, yeah, not on social media. They're real people.
Yeah, thank you. And it's following up from what Councillor Dendor has just said. I'm a little bit dismayed by the leader's response, where he seems to blame social media, he blames IT and he blames planning. The leader of Maidstone Council simply said sorry. He went on TV and said sorry. And we'll get to the bottom of it and we'll work it out. He didn't put out a press release that gave the impression that, as Councillor Dender was, I won't go through it again, it gave the impression that somebody was at fault, and he was astonished and dismayed and angered by the whole thing. So the guy in Maidstone just simply said sorry. And I think the reputation of this council lies heavily on the shoulders of the leader of this council. And I don't think the reputation of this council was done any favours by the overstating in public. And not the naming and shaming, because clearly the guy or the lady wasn't named, but to bring that sort of blame and that, and they would have felt that when they went home that night, that somebody was saying to them, you've done wrong here, and I'm going to go public and tell you you've done wrong. Why could the leader not simply have done the right thing and followed the leader of the Maidstone, and just simply said sorry?
Well, first of all, I couldn't go on TV and say sorry because TV didn't invite me. They invited the leader of Maidstone. I just remind you that it was rather easy for the leader of Maidstone to say sorry. Subsequently, there was no coverage of the situation in Maidstone because only one applicant had been affected by this. So the position for Swale was extremely different to the position for Maidstone. I'm quite happy for people to keep repeating that they think it was wrong. I don't think it was. My interest was the reputation of Swale Borough Council first, and I explained very clearly at the beginning that had we not responded, and had we not responded with a certain amount of vigour, then I think the public would have thought that's pretty weak, and would also have thought we were hoping it would go away. It wasn't very difficult for it to go away for the Maidstone leader because there wasn't really much to concern them. But Chairman, if you want to invite more people in to tell me that I did the wrong thing, then we can carry on doing that. But they are a matter of opinion, not of fact.
Councillor Gibson.
Well, this is a matter of opinion and not fact, I guess, but I have a polar opposite opinion. I think the leader did do the right thing. I think it was important. The fact that he expressed how he was feeling, well, that's something that we've all done from time to time. And with hindsight, I'll be the greatest firefighter that Kent ever had. So again, we can all say that. I'm sure the Merton Borough Council leader didn't go on there and say, sorry, end of story. He would have added other comments, I'm sure. I didn't hear that interview. But I think it is absolutely important, and it was imperative that we did get something out there. And quite frankly, I move in many, many circles, sport, music, you name it, outside of these walls. And I've never, and I can say this hand on heart, had any negative feedback about the leader's statement in the paper. Thank you.
Could I come in, Chairman?
Yeah, Councillor Baldock.
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say, when the leader talks about this being whipped up, I mean, to my mind, the press release, there's no blame in the press release. A press release has to have facts. It has to own up to what's done and acknowledge what happened, and that's what it does in the paragraph. You know, it says, in addition to the incorrect decisions, as used by a junior officer with no knowledge of any of the applications, who believe they were working. You know, this is trying to exonerate the junior officer. Yeah, there's no blame in that paragraph, and it's only the way it's being twisted. And I'll quote from 2 social media postings that went out. Things need to be looked at a lot deeper. Why are officers making these mistakes? That's the sort of thing that got things whipped up. I would say that managers at Mid-Kent should shoulder more responsibility. That's what was going on social media. That's why these people were getting whipped up, because some people were trying to use it as a way to attack the council for political reasons. And that's what I think is really unfortunate about this. So yes, it did get whipped up, but that's because some people wanted it whipped up. And maybe they should have thought about the implications of their behaviour to the individual members of staff.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. But we're not going to be getting into the realms of what should or should not be on social media tonight. I think there's been events in the last week or so which shows the potential outcome of what starts with potential social media and coverage. So we're all public servants. We should have differences of opinion, and that's what makes us a council and a democracy. That's not to say one person's right and one person is wrong. At no point, I don't think, has anybody said this evening that a statement should not have been issued. Absolutely, a statement should have come out. That is a number one thing. If something has gone wrong of this magnitude, then we have to put our hands up and say something has gone wrong. But there is a point, and come back to the line of being the leadership and showing the public that we are in control of this, is saying this has happened. This is what we're going to do about it, and if need be, I apologise for any inconvenience or what it was to that effect. What we ended up doing was saying a junior member of staff, and I am angered and whatever, is not put it in a particularly positive light, when I think the language used could have been better from a leadership aspect for the members of the public to say, yeah, we've messed up and we are sorry for that. We will not let it happen again. Okay. Any other comments? Councillor Gibson.
Yeah, I would just suggest we move on from this. We're here to scrutinise decisions. We're not here to go verbatim through press releases, word for word, and quite frankly, I'm getting quite tired of it, Chair. Thank you.
I appreciate that, and yes, I'm hoping we'll be finishing in a few minutes. But that's the whole point. One of the aspects of scrutiny is looking at what's happened in this entire situation, and part of that is this press release. But I'm not going to dwell on it. I think we've done it enough. I need something else then. The only one thing in terms of a kind of recommendation, a long time ago, and I think maybe a couple of years potentially, there was talk about the leaders of this council, of whichever group, going on some form of communication, social media training, etc. That, to my understanding, has not happened. So I would suggest, as a recommendation from this group, that that should happen, or be made. Should be made, or should be carried out by the group leaders, and should also be made available to members as well.
Can I start?
Yeah, Councillor Trudell.
That is a valued point. I think over the next few weeks, I hope that we are going to talk a little bit about our responsibilities to each other in the light of what you mentioned, the death of an MP. I certainly intend to talk about that when we have a next council meeting. And I also understand that the Standards Committee are going to be looking at that over the next period of time. Out of that would obviously come thoughts about media and how we use it, the media and also the social media. And you know, your suggestion could be part of that, but it's not actually something in isolation to take leaders away. It's something about the whole council and how we try to put our house in order a bit in terms of communication. And clearly, I'll have this press release in mind at the time.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, just to add to that, so what the leader says about the Standards Committee is correct, and I think there is work to be done in terms of how we can get members involved in and engaged in the political culture, and how that kind of can evolve through the Standards Committee. And I think it's right that that work on providing training to senior members on comms kind of could factor into that. I think the recommendation that apparently existed previously probably predates my time as head of service in charge of comms, but I'm certainly happy to take that away and look to get some training for group leaders on that. Thanks.
Councillor.
Thank you, Chair. I'm with Councillor Trulov on this one, actually. I would amend your recommendation. Why just senior members?
No, I didn't say just senior. I think.
Or leaders, even.
No, it should be group leaders and made available to all members. Absolutely.
All members.
Yeah, it should be, I think, mandatory for group leaders and available to all members, because we all have every member has a leadership role in their communities, and social media, whether you like it or don't like it, is a channel to address that. So, yeah, if it came across, I was saying it's only for Councillor Trulove, Councillor Horton, Councillor Baldock, and then whoever else. That's not the intention. It should be for everyone, but the leaders should also take the lead on that.
If that's a recommendation, I'll certainly second it.
Okay, so to try and make it a bit easy in terms of recommendation, I would suggest that we put to or request that the Standards Committee promotes the creation of a social or communication skills training for all members as a matter of urgency. Or member development working group creates a training on social communication, social media as soon as possible. Anyone seconded that? Councillor Dender, anyone want to speak to it?
So I just wanted you to speak to it. And how much is it likely to cost us?
There shouldn't be, other than staff time, which would be a member briefing session, that shouldn't be bring it in here. I don't see it being there.
So this will be for members to decide, but there may be some benefit in having a professional come to deliver the training. I am by no means a professional, and I don't believe we have those expertise, so there may be a small cost, but I think that would be for the member working group to decide what they want.
Okay, thank you.
Any other three? Councillor Whiting.
Only a quick one, Chairman. I just wonder what input the member working group would have on this, other than setting the terms of reference from the professionals that the Chief Exec has outlined might be the best way forward in delivering the training. But this happens elsewhere, and I just wonder whether we're just setting up a little bit of a bureaucracy and delay in actually achieving some very sensible. I mean, we've all been subject to it. We've all been subject to trolling. We've all been subject to hate mail. We've all been subject to all of those things. I can remember at one point, I think during the last elections, the entire Conservative slate was photographed, and it was put up with some crosshairs on it saying "kill them all." And we've had other members use F words, and they've all been reported to police. Nothing gets done. So I think as community leaders, we need to just take a grip of that. But I think that issue is well understood, and I just wonder from the Chief Exec, and as a question, Larissa, can we just simply arrange the appropriate training so that members aren't in any way influencing what it is that we think we should be told?
So I think there does, with respect, I think there does need to be some member influence. I am not a member. I don't know what members go through. And actually, if we just have a short session with members to say, what do you want to get out of it? Is it about how we work with each other? Is it about how we deal with external influences, social media, people having a go, the things that we can learn from what happened sadly to Sir David Amis? I think there are a number of issues that we need to understand that members have a concern about, and then we can tailor it. Otherwise it's officers deciding what members need, and I think that would be a dangerous road for us to go down.
Mr. Clifford.
Thank you. Just to add to that, I think there is absolutely a link with the work that the Standards Committee will be doing, and I think the Member Development Working Group is quite well placed to take advantage of that and really work through how the work can be made to cohere as effectively as possible.
Okay, we've gone slightly off of the original subject, but I think it's actually worthwhile because there is a connection between potential social media training or communications training and our role in that and what we spoke about this evening. So do you need a recommendation for that, or can we just take that?
So we've got the money.
Okay, there is all money in place. Thank you.
Good, it's a Yorkshire thing.
It can be organised fairly, by the sounds of it, Joe thinks it can be organised quite easily, and not a particularly huge amount of money for us, for the council. I think we can take that almost as read, that's been picked up, unless, do we want to put that as a recommendation forward, or we can on the chair? Yeah, so that can be noted. Yeah, okay. Any other comments, members, before I wrap up? Councillor Knights.
When I first became a councillor, and lots of other people with me, when it was our first time, we went on a dynamic councillor course, and surely wouldn't this just be an extension of that type of training? Because a lot of that was covered on that course, so perhaps they could be doing the training.
I think the group, in terms of structure, it will look at all sorts of things, and I find the idea of dynamic and councillor. Yes. On that note, members, at which clock am I looking at? 9:35. Thank you very much for your indulgence this evening. I found that particularly informative and interesting. Thank you for all the comments and input from everyone. Thank you to Democratic Services and Billy and all the officers and members attending. Safe journey home, and see you all soon. Good night.
Well done, Lloyd.